Bryden, certified sommelier and owner of Le Grand Triage on the Upper East Side. We normally do a couple wine classes per week, but since we're all quarantined and staying at home, we're going to be doing some free little mini wine classes for all of you out there in Instagram land. We're going to be posting videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. on Instagram. We're also going to host those videos on our website, so if you miss any and want to backtrack and taste along at home, you can always hop on at legrandtriage.com and check those out. Today, for our very first one, our inaugural tasting, we are having a Pecorino from Le Marche in central Italy, one of my favorite bottles and favorite producers. But we're going to talk a little bit more about this wine and where it comes from in just a second. The real focal point of this little mini lesson is unfiltered wine. A lot of you have probably heard about organic wines, natural wines, all that jazz. So today we're going to explore a little bit of that terminology and find out what that means and what that tastes like. If you even just kind of look at this wine, maybe it's not super clear from you know the camera out here in TV land, but if you just look at this wine, you'll notice it's a little bit more cloudy, a little bit more hazy than kind of the average white wine that you might see. That's because it's unfiltered. So what does unfiltered mean? Why do we care? Are all wines filtered, unfiltered? What does that mean exactly? Well, before we get into the actual unfiltering, maybe we'll take a quick step back and just talk about how wine is made, first of all, before we even get to the filtration process. In order to go from grapes and grape juice into actual wine, we have to go through a process called fermentation, right? Fermentation is basically just converting sugar, which is naturally present in those grapes, into alcohol. That process is 1-to-1. So here's our sugar in our grapes. Here's the alcohol. That process, again, 1-to-1. The catalyst for that process is something called yeast, right? This is the international symbol for yeast, obviously, right? And so here's our sugar, here's our alcohol. The yeast actually converts that sugar, eats it, and turns it into alcohol. If we have more sugar, we end up with more alcohol. If we have less sugar, we end up with less alcohol. So what's really happening here is the yeast as the catalyst for this process. After that yeast is done doing its job, normally we remove that yeast. These yeast cells, we usually say when they're done that they are spent. They've kind of done their job. But really at the end of the day, those yeast cells, they are dead. They're no longer active. And rather than say that we have dead yeast cells in our wine, which is a really unattractive term to even kind of like have around wine, we usually call these things lees, L-E-E-S, right? The lees in wine translates to dead yeast cells. Well, when we're actually filtering wine, that's one of the main things that we are filtering out. There's often other things that we're aiming to actually filter out of wine, but one of the main things is actually the product for converting all those sugars into alcohol, those yeast cells. So when we actually filter them, we're taking those out. We're also taking harsh tannins. We're taking a lot of things out. But again, one of the main things we're trying to take out is actually all of these dead yeast cells. So when you actually see an unfiltered or a natural wine, something that is a little bit more hazy and turbid, one of the things that you're actually going to notice with some of those stringy kind of things that you're going to sediment that you're going to see in the wine is that's actually the lees or the dead yeast cells in them. Why do we want to keep those in? Why doesn't everyone take them out? Well, a lot of natural producers believe that those actually carry very unique flavor profiles that are innate to those yeasts. Imagine when you continue to use the exact same yeast starter and to carry on a certain flavor profile that is associated with that yeast, right? It's very important to keep that in something like a bread or a sourdough, right? So for a lot of winemakers, it's equally as important. You want to keep that yeast in contact because it is providing all of that flavor to the wine. So for this one, this actually goes through a very, very light filtration process. As crazy as it sounds, the very light filtration that it goes through is actually cardboard, which is relatively commonplace for a lot of liquids, like let's say vodkas, some spirits, oils, syrups, things like that. But in this case, wine. One of the most common ways that in the wine industry we actually filter a lot of our wines and get them absolutely like crystal clear, perfectly translucent, is we actually use egg whites. Egg whites, they have a certain albumin or protein that's actually attracting a lot of that gunk and kind of sticking it to it. So that way when we actually remove them, it has all of that stuff that would make the wine cloudy otherwise stuck to it. So when we remove it, the wines then become perfectly clear. Sadly, because a lot of wines actually come into contact with egg whites, it means that a lot of wines are actually not vegan. However, unfiltered wines would be, in a certain de facto sense, actually vegan, which is pretty neat. Adriatic were really disenfranchised with some of the white grapes that were coming out of that region, namely Trebbiano and Malvasia, and they wanted something more. They were just like, life has to be better than this shitty white wine we drink all the time. So Pecorino itself is a grape that in Italy only really rose to popularity in the last 20 or so years. In the 1980s, a lot of Italian wine producers in Le Marche and Abruzzo, kind of like central Italy on the eastern coast, near the looking for answers. There was one particular Italian who sought around and heard whispers of this older Italian gentleman who grew this grape, pretty unknown at the time, in the 1980s, called Pecorino. Sought after this older winemaker, found these vineyards, old vineyards. He took some plantings about eight years later, created his first crop of Pecorino, fell in love with it, and kept producing the wines. Just to give you an idea, in about 2001, I think there were about 87 hectares of Pecorino, and in 2011 there were over 350, right? So the plantings for this grape have over quadrupled in 10, 11 years. Absolutely wild. So once the Italian winemakers in this region and the Italian people started to actually taste this grape, really kind of fell in love with it and pushed the production forward. So become one of our new favorites. It's got some really fun, interesting flavors and things going on. So if you guys have been lucky enough to grab a bottle and taste with us at home, if you haven't taken a sip already, please go ahead and do so. I get this really nice, like lemon, kind of older lemon, lime, a lot of citrus notes to it, but also like an underripe honeydew. Like if you've ever had, you're eating honeydew and you get close to those edge pieces that are a little bit harder and almost like more of a bright green. It's kind of what this reminds me of. Really green wine, if you will. It has all these like more herbaceous notes. Sometimes we call them pyrazines for those wine geeks out there. But I think one of my favorite things about the wine itself is it almost has this like yeasty to its extended lees contact, right? Contact with those dead yeast cells. But it also retains a lot of acidity. And so if you are not familiar with acidity, take another sip of this wine and you're actually going to encounter that acidity in the very back of your mouth. Way back here, you're actually going to feel this like pinching or tensing up, this little bit biting sort of reaction in the very back of your mouth. And that's basically your salivary glands involuntarily activating in response to that acidity. Normally when you have it, but what I really love about this wine is that you're actually able to balance those two things simultaneously. So if you take another sip, I actually really want you to focus on the texture, the kind of volume, a little bit more of a textured white wine. It's in absence of those sharp, acidic sort of sensations. It's very difficult to balance both of those things. Usually it's kind of one or the other. They're at the expense of each other, while still retaining this really sharp element back here. That's what we call a wine that's in balance, right? When you have something that is too much of one or too much of the other, that would be a wine that's out of balance. So, well, another really, or just a big key feature of Pecorino is its ability to hold those simultaneously. So here's the wine again, Pecorino, the grape, the producer, La Caniette down here, unfiltered. We talked about that. I think I have one of the higher end ones in here somewhere. Just want to show you guys real quickly. Nope, it's the California shelf. I think there's some, I think I have the Italian ones. Nope. The DOCG down here, the official area in Le Marche where this is grown. Boom, they make a high-end one as well that's actually, oh my gosh, dynamite. I'll actually, so here I've got Italian wines, here we go. So here's their higher end Pecorino, Lo Sono Gaia, same producer. This was actually listed as one of the absolute must-try pecorinos from Jan de Gatta's native grapes of Italy. Pretty cool. If you guys have had a chance to try it at home, maybe leave us a comment or questions. Let us know what you think. This is our first wine. And we'll be giving you guys the wines ahead of time. So if you want to know what we're going to be tasting for our next video and for next week, follow along and maybe grab some bottles in advance so you can join us live. Thanks and cheers.